When you wake up in the middle of the night, the first and often most damaging mistake people make is exposing their eyes to artificial light. This may seem harmless. After all, it's just a quick glance at the time on your phone, a stroll to the bathroom with the light on, or turning on a lamp to read for a bit. But these seemingly minor actions have a major physiological impact on your brain's ability to maintain and restore natural sleep patterns. To understand why this happens, we need to explore the deep relationship between light and the human circadian rhythm. The circadian rhythm is your internal biological clock that regulates the sleep-wake cycle, and it is extremely sensitive to light. Light, especially in the blue wavelength spectrum, directly influences a group of neurons in the hypothalamus called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, or SCN. The SCN is effectively the master clock of the brain. It receives direct input from a specific group of cells in the retina, called the intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells, or IPRGC. These cells don't contribute to vision, but exist solely to detect light intensity and signal it to the brain. When you expose your eyes to artificial light during the night, especially from LED screens, overhead lights, or even a bedside lamp, the IPRGC send a signal to the SCN that it is daytime. In response, your brain suppresses melatonin production, which is a hormone that promotes and maintains sleep. Melatonin isn't just important for falling asleep, it plays a critical role in helping you stay asleep. It is also involved in regulating body temperature, blood pressure, and glucose metabolism, functions that are deeply tied to restful, restorative sleep. Even a brief exposure to artificial light in the middle of the night can disrupt this process. Studies have shown that as little as 1 to 3 minutes of light exposure can begin to suppress melatonin in release and shift the phase of your circadian rhythm. That means you're not just waking up for a moment, you're effectively sending your brain a signal that can cause it to misalign the rest of your sleep cycle. This makes it harder to fall back asleep and degrades the quality of sleep for the remainder of the night, even if you do manage to drift off again. What's even more problematic is that many people, upon waking, instinctively reach for their phone. The blue light emitted from smartphones is particularly potent when it comes to circadian disruption. Your phone may be the single brightest and most intense source of blue light in your immediate environment. And beyond just the light, the act of checking your phone often includes a cognitive engagement, treating messages, looking at the time, thinking about tasks for tomorrow, which further activates your wakefulness systems and pulls you out of the sleep-ready state. Another common behavior is turning on bathroom lights during a nighttime trip. While this seems practical, it floods the eyes with intense brightness, often in the blue-white spectrum. This not only disrupts melatonin in production, but also signals the brain to become more alert. A better solution would be to use a red or amber night light. These have longer wavelengths and are far less likely to affect melatonin in secretion or shift your circadian timing. It's also important to note that the eyes don't need to be looking directly into a light source for the brain to detect and respond to it. Ambient light, light bouncing off walls, ceilings, and surfaces, can still be picked up by those IPRGC and send signals to the SCN. So even a softly lit room, if not using the correct spectrum, can be enough to create sleep disruption. Blackout curtains, sleep masks, and eliminating stand-by lights from electronics in your bedroom can all make a measurable difference. People who struggle with insomnia or fragmented sleep often don't realize that their environment is playing a much bigger role than they think. They might address stress, caffeine intake, or screen time before bed, but overlook what happens in the middle of the night. The brain is extraordinarily sensitive to cues from the environment when in a drowsy or semi-sleep state, and light is the most powerful of those cues. By avoiding exposure to artificial light during these vulnerable moments, you're giving your brain the best chance to return to its natural rhythm without interference. When you wake up during the night, one of the most instinctive things people do is check the time, either on a phone, an alarm clock, or a smartwatch. This small, seemingly harmless act is actually one of the most disruptive things you can do to your sleep and your nervous system. The moment you look at the clock, your brain is pulled out of a neutral or sleep-ready state and pushed toward wakefulness. This shift is not just psychological, it's physiological, and it can have lasting effects on your ability to fall back asleep, as well as on the quality of your sleep for the rest of the night. Knowing the time instantly triggers a mental calculation. You begin to estimate how many hours are left before you have to get up, how long you've already been asleep, or how little sleep you may be getting. These thoughts create a state of mild stress or urgency. Cortisol, the body's primary stress hormone, begins to rise, and your brain becomes more alert. Even if you tell yourself you're just checking, your nervous system doesn't make that distinction. It interprets the act as a cue to shift from a restful state into one of cognitive engagement and vigilance. What's even more problematic is that this habit often snowballs. Once you know the time, you're more likely to start thinking about the day ahead, meetings, tasks, deadlines, conversations. This cognitive activation can escalate quickly, and before you know it, you're fully awake, lying in bed, unable to quiet your mind. The more you repeat this habit over multiple nights, the more your brain begins to associate waking up at night with mental stimulation. It becomes a feedback loop. You wake up, check the time, start thinking, and reinforce a pattern of nighttime alertness. This problem is exacerbated when the time is checked on a smartphone. Not only does this expose your eyes to blue light, which, as mentioned previously, suppresses melatonin and disrupts your circadian rhythm, but the phone is also a portal to all kinds of stimulating content. Notifications, emails, texts, and news headlines can easily pull you into a state of heightened attention. Even if you resist the temptation to interact with your phone beyond checking the time, the act of unlocking the screen and seeing information is often enough to jolt the brain into a more wakeful mode. Traditional alarm clocks can be just as problematic, especially if they are brightly lit or display the time in a way that's easily visible from bed. Some people keep their clock right next to their face, so the moment they stir, their eyes go straight to the glowing numbers. The visual cue alone, even without mental calculations, can trigger a shift in brain activity. If your brain sees 3:47 a.m., it doesn't just register the number. It begins to process what that number means, how long you've been awake, and whether or not it's too late to get back to sleep. These thoughts are subtle, but they're enough to prevent your system from returning to a calm, sleep-ready state. There's also a more primal aspect to this behavior. Humans are pattern recognition machines. When you check the time and see a consistent pattern, like waking at 2:30 a.m. every night, you might begin to create a narrative around it. Why am I always waking up at this time? Or is something wrong with me? These questions, even if you don't speak them aloud, stimulate your frontal cortex, the brain region associated with planning, worry, and problem solving. Again, this pulls you further away from the relaxed brain state that sleep requires. One of the core principles of healthy sleep is protecting the boundary between night and day, between rest and action. Checking the time in the middle of the night crosses that boundary. It introduces a layer of structure and measurement into a period that should remain unstructured and undefined. Your goal when waking in the middle of the night should be to avoid anything that gives the brain a reason to wake further. The simple act of knowing the time, of assigning meaning to your wakefulness, makes it significantly harder to return to a restful state. In neuroscience and behavioral studies, it's well established that anticipation and monitoring behaviors, like clock watching, are tightly linked to increased cognitive arousal and anxiety. People who suffer from insomnia often fall into the trap of obsessively tracking how much sleep they're getting, which only amplifies their sleep difficulties. Breaking that cycle begins with not checking the time during the night. Letting go of the need to monitor allows your nervous system to relax and disengage from the cycle of hypervigilance. When you wake up during the night, one of the most important yet often overlooked actions is to remain physically still and avoid unnecessary movement, especially getting out of bed without a critical reason. The body and brain work in close coordination during sleep, and even minor physical movements can disrupt the delicate state that allows you to re-enter sleep smoothly. The human body has internal cues that help regulate the transition between sleep stages, and when you remain motionless upon waking, you maintain a bridge between wakefulness and sleep that makes it easier to fall back asleep. However, when you move, especially when you sit up, stand, or begin walking, you signal to the brain that wakefulness is required, and the sleep system begins to deactivate. Movement activates various neural circuits involved in posture, balance, and locomotion, all of which are linked to the reticular activating system in the brainstem. This system is responsible for regulating alertness and arousal. Even small actions like propping yourself up on your elbows, adjusting your pillow too vigorously, or walking to another room stimulate this system. That arousal, once triggered, can elevate heart rate, increase core body temperature, and reduce the production of sleep, promoting neurotransmitters such as GABA and melatonin. The transition from sleep to full wakefulness becomes more complete, making it harder to return to a restful state. Staying still is a behavioral signal to the body that the waking is temporary and not something requiring action. This is particularly relevant in the case of brief nighttime awakenings, which are completely normal and occur in most healthy sleep cycles. The key difference lies in how you respond. A person who stirs, stays still, and resists the urge to engage with the environment is far more likely to drift back to sleep quickly than someone who shifts position, stretches, or sits up to assess their surroundings. Movement encourages the release of norepinephrine, a neurotransmitter associated with alertness, focus, and energy mobilization. That chemical signal opposes the neurochemistry of sleep, making the return to unconsciousness a more uphill task. Getting out of bed is particularly disruptive because it engages larger muscle groups and often involves activating the vestibular system, your body's internal sense of balance and spatial orientation. Once you begin walking or changing rooms, even briefly, you are reinforcing a behavioral pattern that tells your brain nighttime awakenings are a time for activity. Over time, this can train your system to become more wakeful during these hours, creating a feedback loop of interrupted sleep and restlessness. This phenomenon is documented in people with chronic sleep disturbances. The more frequently they get out of bed at night, the more their bodies become conditioned to associate the nighttime hours with wakeful behavior rather than rest. Additionally, physical stillness supports the natural oscillations in brainwave activity associated with sleep. During the night, your brain cycles through different stages of sleep, including light sleep, deep slow-wave sleep, and REM sleep. Brief awakenings typically occur between these stages, and, if not interrupted by movement or stimulation, the brain will usually reinitiate the sleep cycle without difficulty. But when movement is introduced, especially sustained movement like walking or stretching, these oscillations are interrupted. The brain no longer receives the internal signals needed to reinitiate the next stage of sleep, and instead shifts toward wakeful patterns dominated by beta and gamma waves, which are associated with problem solving and sensory processing. Many people believe that getting out of bed to shake off the restlessness might help, but in reality, it tends to prolong the time spent awake. The urge to move may come from discomfort, anxiety, or frustration, all of which are emotional states that are exacerbated by physical action. Stillness, on the other hand, helps maintain the relaxation response mediated by the parasympathetic nervous system. This system promotes rest, digestion, and recovery. When you lie still, breathing slowly and resisting the impulse to act, you give the parasympathetic system a chance to do its work and guide you back into sleep. It's also worth considering how body temperature plays into this equation. Sleep, onset, and maintenance are closely tied to a drop in core body temperature. The more you move, the more heat you generate internally, especially if you're walking around or stretching. This elevation in temperature, even if modest, can further delay the onset of sleep because the body now has to work to cool back down to the sleep threshold. Maintaining stillness helps preserve the cooler internal environment conducive to continued sleep, especially during the second half of the night when the body is naturally more sensitive to temperature changes. Remaining still doesn't mean holding tension or forcing yourself to lie rigidly. It means maintaining a relaxed, passive posture, keeping your muscles loose, your breathing slow, and avoiding the impulse to engage with the physical world. This behavioral cue sends a strong signal to your brain that it is still nighttime, that there is no need for wakefulness, and that the conditions for sleep remain intact when you wake up in the middle of the night. The mind's tendency to immediately engage in thoughts, planning, problem solving, or worrying can be one of the most powerful obstacles to falling back asleep. While physical stillness is important, mental stillness is equally critical. The human brain is naturally wired to assess, calculate, and predict, and during the day, this serves a valuable purpose. But at night, especially during unintended awakenings, allowing the mind to slip into active thinking reactivates circuits in the brain that are associated with alertness, decision making, and emotional regulation. This disrupts the neural balance that supports sleep and keeps you anchored in a state of internal agitation that resists rest. The frontal cortex, especially the prefrontal regions, are responsible for executive functions such as planning, time management, and self-reflection. These areas should be relatively quiet during sleep. However, if you wake up and immediately begin to think about the day ahead, go over conversations from earlier, rehearse what you'll say in tomorrow's meeting, or worry about a problem that hasn't been solved, you activate this region of the brain. Once the frontal cortex is engaged, it is very difficult to calm it back down. Neural activity shifts into high-frequency beta waves, the kind most commonly observed during states of mental focus and task engagement. This is the opposite of the slow wave or theta-dominated brain states associated with falling asleep. One of the most misleading instincts is to try to think your way back to sleep. People often believe that if they can figure something out, or mentally solve whatever is bothering them, they will be able to relax and drift off. But this process leads the brain down an ever-deepening cognitive loop that reinforces wakefulness. The longer you engage with thoughts, the more you stimulate the wake, promoting systems in the brain, particularly the hypothalamus and brainstem regions that govern arousal and alertness. In evolutionary terms, nighttime was a period when any form of active thinking or problem solving might have signaled the presence of danger or the need for vigilance. The brain is still wired with that response. Cognitive activity, no matter how abstract or logical, sends a signal that something important is happening and must be dealt with. Even seemingly harmless types of thinking, such as daydreaming or imagination, can interfere with the return to sleep. These processes still involve cortical activation and typically come with visual imagery or emotional engagement. For the brain, emotional engagement is a marker of importance. It doesn't differentiate between real and imagined scenarios at the level of activation. So whether you're worrying about a financial issue or fantasizing about a vacation, the brain responds by increasing attention and delaying the shift into the sleep-promoting rhythm of delta or theta waves. Another subtle trap is the attempt to calm the mind by mentally reviewing relaxation strategies. While relaxation techniques are helpful when practiced properly, turning them into another item on a mental checklist, I should do deep breathing, then body scanning, then count backwards, can turn into another form of mental engagement. The key distinction lies in being versus doing. Sleep is a passive state, not something you achieve through effort, but something you allow. The more you try to make it happen through mental effort, the more you inadvertently suppress the very mechanisms that support it. Neurochemically, cognitive activity in the middle of the night interferes with the rebalancing of neurotransmitters and hormones that naturally prepare the body for the next sleep cycle. Wakeful thinking increases cortisol levels and can inhibit the parasympathetic nervous system, which is responsible for rest and recovery. Once cortisol rises above a certain threshold, it suppresses melatonin and stimulates the amygdala, the brain's emotional processing center. This creates a state of subtle vigilance or anxiety that may not be intense, but is sufficient to keep you out of sleep's reach. Sleep is built on patterns, and the more you allow your mind to engage during nocturnal awakenings, the more you reinforce a habit loop. The brain begins to associate nighttime waking with mental stimulation and planning. Over time, this can condition your nervous system to become increasingly alert during those nighttime windows, making sleep more fragmented and less restorative. This form of conditioning operates below conscious awareness and can be very difficult to reverse if not addressed deliberately. The most effective approach is to recognize that any form of cognitive engagement, no matter how seemingly minor, is a signal to the brain that it's time to wake up and do something. Awareness of this pattern can help you create enough distance between yourself and your thoughts to let them pass without involvement. Letting go of mental engagement allows the brain to return to its natural sleep cycle, guided by physiological rhythms instead of psychological effort. The environment in which you sleep plays a crucial role in determining how easily you can return to sleep after waking during the night. Subtle factors such as ambient light, sound levels, temperature, and even the feel of your bedding can either support your nervous system in slipping back into a restful state or stimulate it enough to keep you awake for an extended period. The body and brain rely on sensory cues to maintain the boundary between wakefulness and sleep, and when those cues are disrupted or misaligned, it becomes significantly harder to fall back asleep. Paying attention to these environmental signals can help prevent the escalation from a brief awakening to prolonged insomnia. Light is one of the most powerful regulators of your circadian rhythm. Even small amounts of light, such as a hallway bulb under a door, the soft glow of a digital clock, or ambient light from a window, can suppress the production of melatonin, the hormone responsible for signaling sleep to the brain. Melatonin operates in darkness, and its release is immediately inhibited when light reaches the retina, especially blue spectrum light. When you wake in the night and your eyes catch even a minor source of light, your brain interprets that cue as a possible indication of morning or a time to become alert. This effect is more pronounced in the second half of the night when your body is more sensitive to environmental stimuli due to changes in hormone levels. Noise also contributes significantly to nighttime awakenings and your ability to fall back asleep. Sudden sounds, inconsistent background noise, or even the anticipation of noise can keep your nervous system slightly elevated. When you're asleep, your auditory system doesn't shut off. It continues to monitor the environment for potential threats. This was a survival adaptation in human evolution, but it now means that a distant car alarm, a dripping faucet, or footsteps from a neighboring apartment can be enough to rouse you. More importantly, After waking, the continued presence of background noise, even if subtle, can prevent your brain from fully re-entering the deep stages of sleep. The more unpredictable or erratic the sound, the more disruptive it is to your sleep system. Temperature is another environmental factor that plays an often underestimated role in nighttime wakefulness. Your body temperature naturally drops as you sleep, and maintaining a cool environment supports this drop. If the room is too warm or if your bedding traps heat, it becomes harder for your body to stay in or return to sleep. Overheating can cause restlessness, sweating, and repeated awakenings. On the other hand, if the room is too cold or if your feet are cold, one of the most common and overlooked causes of disrupted sleep, you may find yourself waking up shivering or simply uncomfortable. These small physical discomforts act as micro stressors that raise your level of physiological arousal just enough to interrupt your sleep cycle. The feel of your bed also matters. Lumpy pillows, twisted sheets, or a sagging mattress can create physical discomfort that you may not notice consciously, but that your body responds to nonetheless. The sensory feedback from uncomfortable bedding can activate micro movements and shifting positions, which are subtle forms of arousal that keep the brain in lighter stages of sleep. Upon waking, if the first sensation your body registers is discomfort, it adds another barrier to re-entry into sleep. The nervous system interprets that physical stress as a sign of vulnerability or imbalance, prompting increased alertness as a protective mechanism. Smell, though less commonly discussed, also plays a role. Certain odors, such as artificial fragrances, cleaning chemicals, or stale air, can activate the olfactory system and increase alertness. On the other hand, calming scents like lavender or sandalwood, when used mindfully, can promote a sense of safety and relaxation. The olfactory bulb is directly connected to areas of the brain involved in emotion and memory, so smell has the ability to trigger subconscious responses that either hinder or help your ability to fall back asleep. When you wake up during the night, your environment is either working for you or against you. Every sensory input, from the brightness of your room to the softness of your sheets, communicates something to your nervous system. If those signals are inconsistent with rest, your brain remains on alert. Creating a sleep environment that consistently promotes calmness, comfort, and darkness allows your body to relax more quickly after unintentional awakenings. Consistency is also key. If your environment sends mixed messages, dark one night, bright the next, quiet 1 hour, noisy the next, your body has no clear cues to rely on. This unpredictability keeps the nervous system in a semi-alert state, which becomes a major barrier to quality sleep over time. The habit of checking the time when you wake up in the middle of the night may seem harmless or even helpful, but it can significantly disrupt your ability to return to sleep. Clock checking activates a cascade of physiological and psychological processes that push the brain toward wakefulness rather than relaxation. When you wake at night and glance at the clock, you immediately become mentally alert as you process what time it is and begin calculating how much sleep you've lost, how many hours remain before your alarm, and what the implications might be for the next day. This mental arithmetic, even if it seems automatic and subtle, re-engages cognitive systems that are otherwise meant to be dormant during sleep. The brain thrives on patterns and predictability, and sleep is a deeply rhythmic and unconscious process. Introducing conscious awareness of time disrupts the natural, passive surrender that sleep requires. Instead of allowing your mind and body to stay in a receptive state, you draw attention inward, triggering the prefrontal cortex, which manages planning, evaluation, and logical reasoning. Once this part of the brain is activated, it becomes increasingly difficult to settle back into sleep. This mental alertness sends signals to other areas of the brain to prepare for the waking day, even if that moment of wakefulness was just a temporary blip in your sleep cycle. This time awareness often creates performance anxiety around sleep. You may begin to worry that you haven't had enough rest, that you'll be tired during an important meeting, or that your entire day will be compromised. This concern can spiral quickly, increasing stress hormones like cortisol, which makes it harder for the body to relax. This physiological stress response counteracts the body's production of melatonin, a key hormone for maintaining sleep. The very act of clock watching becomes a trigger for internal tension and wakefulness, even when you're trying to calm yourself. Repeated clock checking can also condition your brain to form a habit loop. Over time, your brain begins to associate nighttime wakefulness with time awareness. Instead of naturally drifting back to sleep, you instinctively check the time, reinforcing the behavior. The more you do this, the more likely it is that your body will start waking up at the same time every night in anticipation. This creates a recurring sleep disruption that is maintained not by external stressors or physical discomfort, but by the learned behavior of monitoring the clock. Moreover, many people use devices like smartphones to check the time during the night, and this adds another layer of disruption. The blue light emitted by screens suppresses melatonin in production, which makes it more difficult for the brain to shift back into sleep mode. Even if the exposure is brief, the light is intense enough to alter your circadian rhythm, especially during the early morning hours when your body is most sensitive to light cues. Additionally, the temptation to glance at notifications, emails, or messages can further stimulate your brain and lead to longer periods of wakefulness. Even non-digital clocks can be problematic. Glowing numbers or backlit displays can create a subtle but constant source of light in your sleeping environment, one that your brain continues to register even with your eyes closed. The habit of orienting yourself by time keeps you tethered to waking consciousness and increases your awareness of being awake, rather than easing you back into unconscious rest. Psychologically, knowing the time reinforces a sense of urgency. It prompts thoughts like, "I've only slept 4 hours," "I need to be up in 3 hours," or "if I don't fall asleep now, tomorrow will be ruined." These thoughts may feel productive, but they are inherently stress-inducing and interfere with the mental quietude that supports sleep. The mind starts to perceive sleep as a task that must be achieved within a deadline, which is counterproductive. Sleep is not something that can be forced through willpower or monitored like a work schedule. The more you try to control it through time awareness, the more elusive it becomes. The best approach is to remove the time reference altogether from your sleep environment. Turning your clock away from view or placing your phone in another room can eliminate the temptation to check. By removing time awareness, you allow your body to operate based on internal signals rather than external measurements. This supports the re-entry into sleep as a natural process, not one interrupted by judgment, calculation, or pressure. Without the distraction and stimulation of time, the mind is more likely to remain passive, and the body can maintain the hormonal balance and brainwave patterns necessary for deep, uninterrupted rest.